Alright, so Honkai Star Rail has been getting a lot of negativity lately, and I've definitely been a part of that for sure. I've been complacent within this, but I do think it is deserved. The game's not in the greatest state right now, and we just want to see it do better. That's literally all it is. But for today, I decided we'd do something a little bit different, something a little more positive, and talk about the most underrated characters in the game, or, the most underappreciated characters in the game right now. That's going to include sustainability characters, DPS, support, sub-DPS, the whole lot. So if you think there's any underappreciated or underrated characters in the meta, please go ahead and put those down in the comments below, because I'm not going to be able to cover all of them in one little video here. I want to cover some of the big ones I think are important to talk about right now. So go ahead and put your comments down below, like and subscribe if you like this kind of stuff. We cover a bunch of different gacha games, and let's go ahead and get into this. Now let's just get this first one out of the way here, because I've already spoken about this character already, and that is Serval. Serval doesn't really get thought about that much, because a lot of people pulled Acheron, so when they see a lightning weak, they just pull out Acheron. Even if the enemies aren't lightning weak, they just pull out Acheron, right? Some people have Tingyun, but Serval has been on Tingyun's heels since literally 1.0, and in some circumstances can even outperform the guy, right? Yeah, sure, Sunday came out, and he's definitely giving Tingyun some high-powered buffing, right? But you have to remember, he also helps buff Serval. Serval doesn't have a summon, but she really gets a lot out of that energy boost that she will get out of a character like Sunday, and this is really being shown well in the current memory of Chaos 12. She's an absolute beast. If you don't believe me, go ahead and look it up for yourself. She's clearing with ease, as long as you have a good team set up around here and good relics, which is the case for literally any character, right? And dude, I almost forgot about this, okay? Serval, this is a bunch of data, by the way, that was collected for the most recent memory of Chaos. It was recently updated yesterday, and a bunch of different communities were involved with the data collection for this, so a bunch of different players' data was collected for this. Serval has a 3.39% usage rating in the current memory of Chaos 12, and dude, Firefly has a 2.22% usage rating and a slower clear time. Now, I'm not using that as hate on Firefly. I'm using her as a benchmark because she's a good character. And by the way, yeah, it doesn't have the right weakness type for her in that Memory of Chaos, but she does have weakness implant essentially within her kit. So she is a good representation of a strong character, and she's being used most of the time on side 1 of Memory of Chaos 12, which is easier than the Nikador boss fight to some players. I think Nikador's easier than the Swarm, depending on your team, but I just wanted to use that as a way to show that Serval is a rather underrated character, and she's having a moment to shine right now in the current endgame content. But enough about Serval. I don't want to sound like a broken record. I've already spoken about her several different times in recent videos. I wanted to move on to an old but gold. I'm talking, of course, about Clara, who, back in the day when I made a dedicated video for her, going over how she was, at the time, the most underrated DPS character in the game. Well, now she's not, obviously. I don't stand by that anymore. The video's like over a year old, I think, now. But people were just kind of sleeping on her at the time, right? Veterans of the game weren't really playing her anymore. She was a 1.0 character. People kind of just moved on, and new players didn't even really know how good she could be because they were looking at the new shiny things coming out on banners. But she's actually a really fun character, and when I mean she, I mean Svarog, because let's be real, what makes Clara cool is Svarog. I don't care about little twinkle toes over there. I'm not hating on you if you like that kind of thing, whatever. I think it's kind of weird, but look, Svarog has got to be like the coolest dude in the whole entire game, right? I mean, that dude is so hype, okay? Seriously. And there's so many fun ways to play with a Clara. There's so many fun, intricate, and cool ways that you could make a team work with her, whether you're using Huo and Tingyun for energy blasting, Sparkle for the extended buff that she has because you give her that extra turn, but because you can build Clara to be a little bit slower, she doesn't necessarily go right away. She holds on to that buff for a little bit, and you can use someone like Robin to just negate that whole entire problem. There's so many fun ways to play a character like this and make them strong. It's one of the most fun teams to build, or characters to build a team around, because there's so many different ways you can do it. And there's plenty of, relics and stuff like that in the game nowadays that can really make her pop off. Now, she's really underrated nowadays because, well, as far as counter characters are concerned, there's more options now. I'm looking at Yoon Lee, who is quite literally Clara 2.0. She's genuinely just a massive improvement to Clara, right? She really just is. But you guys have probably been playing the game a long time now, right? So if you check your accounts, you might have some Clara Eidolons right now. And if you don't have a Yun Li and you've always been interested in the counter meta or something like that, go ahead and give it a try. I'm not saying that she's going to be the most impactful DPS on your account. Far from it. But every once in a while, just like with Serval, there are certain moments where she gets to really shine, like whenever the Pure Fiction buff comes out with a follow-up attack. She's a counter character that's a follow-up attack, and so she can really pop off. She has an AoE skill, right? A lot of people started building their Claras whenever Pure Fiction was catering to the counter or follow-up meta, so whenever it does have that buff in Pure Fiction, she can really shine. It's definitely a character you can potentially use if you were feeling so inclined. But in all fairness, she's not going to be your first pick, and she's not going to be my first pick either. None of the characters on this list will be. That's the whole point of underrated characters, right? When the content does fit their needs, they will perform well, and when it doesn't, they might not. Yeah, they might not be doing so hot. Now let's talk about everybody's favorite emo kid from My Chemical Romance. It is Blade. Blade is such... Oh man, I kind of feel bad for the guy. There was the HP thing with the crit deal, with the gotcha smack and the guoba. There's the whole fact that, like, he was one of the first characters that's a premium in the game, so he's kind of fallen off as far as damage output is concerned. Every once in a while, some cool thing happens for the guy, like Jing Liu getting released in the game, and then he became relevant again, because that was actually, I think, if I recall correctly, that was like the strongest team in the game at the time when Jing Liu dropped, was actually a dual DPS team with Blade and Jing Liu, because they could constantly buff each other up if you have your team set up right. It was a really cool combo, and let's not forget, Blade is the only kind of like traditional DPS for wind in the game right now. Who else do we got? Black Swan? That's not a traditional DPS. She has back-loaded damage, not front-loaded damage like somebody like Blade would have, for example. Now, we are going to be getting another wind character coming up soon here in the form of Anaxa, or Anaxa, however the heck you say his name. I don't know how to pronounce it yet. I've never heard anyone in the game say it yet, but Blade, I think, will potentially become relevant once, like, the meta shifts towards something that might favor him a little bit more. Will he be your first pick? Again, probably not, but he still, to this day, still bangs really hard. People still upload really cool and fun clears and MOC with him, because they're dedicated Blade enjoyers. Gotcha Smack, for example, is a good example of this. He's a super hard, die-hard Blade fan, and he occasionally rocks Blade in certain content you wouldn't expect Blade to necessarily excel in, showcasing that Blade is an underrated character. Now, this next one's gonna be a bit more of a controversial take, a little bit of a hotter take, or a colder take, depending on how you look at it. I'm speaking, of course, about Gepard. Yeah, he doesn't exactly hold up as well anymore, does he, right? He can't trigger his shields as often as Aventurine does, right? He doesn't have that type of a mechanic that's as reliable, making him, of course, less reliable than someone like Aventurine. So he's going to require a lot more investment on relics and, you know, having to have a powerful team around him that can clear relatively quickly so that he can maintain his shields long enough for you to get the clear, right? So it's a bit of, he's going to need a ton of energy regeneration too in order to keep that ult up as often as possible, because he really needs to ult like as often as possible to maintain your team, because he isn't as reliable as a character like Aventurine, right? Fushuan, for example, like the preservation characters are a bit interesting, right? We don't have a whole lot of them, and you know, you have Gepard, you have Aventurine. Someone like Fushuan, for example, doesn't even have shields. The only way she can get a shield is if she's using a specific light cone, and that light cone only gives a shield to her. It doesn't put a shield on the rest of your team, right? So he, unfortunately, is a 1.0 shielder. He doesn't hold up as well as a result of that, but he can still work. He just doesn't work as well, making him a bit of an underrated character. Again, he can get the job done. He's just not as good at doing it as a lot of the other characters above him. Now, this next one some of you guys might disagree with, but not necessarily because it's a bad character that is underrated. It's actually because they're a good character that is rated pretty well by a lot of players. I'm speaking about Tingyun, okay? This was literally the best character in the entire game on launch, and she was the best character in the game all the way until 1.6 when Ron May released. And that didn't make her bad, it just made her not as good as Ron May when she released. But she was still best in slot on a lot of teams, and is still very, very powerful. That amount of energy that she gives you is insanely strong, man. And so it's really, really useful, and she's the free-to-play fixer or option on a lot of teams that either need a bunch of energy or, you know, need certain things that she can provide because her utility is insane. She's like a Swiss Army knife, bro. She was the most used character for a long time for Zero Cycles, and occasionally people are still, to prove their point, using her in certain content. For example, when people were talking about how Aglaia is a bit more of a selfish DPS, I was even telling people, hey, if you want to try a free-to-play Aglaia team, go ahead and try Tingyun on her to see what happens, because she wants that energy. Tingyun provides the energy. You don't got a Sunday? Try the Tingyun, right? So she's underrated by some players, right? But she's very well rated by other players as well. A little bit of a controversial character to some, simply because some people devalue her, some people hold too much value in her. It's a little bit of a mixed bag. So I wanted to just bring her up, talk about her briefly, because I think she deserved to be on the list, because there are people that don't appreciate her and undervalue her. Again, an underrated character by some of the community. And just to get this out of the way, because it kind of goes hand in hand with Tingyun, I'm talking about Pela, okay? Dude, everyone when Silverwolf dropped was all Silverwolf, Silverwolf, Silverwolf. And guys, hate to break it to you, Pela was always better. All right, there are some very niche situations where Silverwolf will perform better, but that's gonna be single target, and not every single target situation Silverwolf outperforms. Pela is oftentimes the better choice for a defense down team than someone like Silverwolf, because Silverwolf, unfortunately, being locked behind single target does mean that when, let's say, your single target DPS takes out one of the characters that has debuffs on them, and then the follow-up attack from that DPS goes on to the next enemy, does the next enemy have a debuff on them? Probably not, but they will if you have Pela, because she has that AoE ultimate that pops off regularly. The most common problem I see with people's teams that use a Pela is that they just don't have a well-built Pela, right? They need Pela does require some investment, but right, you put the Pearls of Universal Sweat Light Cone on her, you build her to be super duper fast, and you also build her to have high effect hit rate so that the Pearls of Sweat Light Cone can drop that debuff on enemies. People say all the time that my Acheron's not hitting as hard, my Pela this, my Pela that, and I'm like, bro, let me see your Pela. And then I look at their Pela and I'm like, no wonder your Acheron team isn't doing that well. Your Pela is kind of hot garbage, bro. Come on, build that thing up. You know what I'm saying? Don't get me wrong, Zhao Cho's like obviously an improvement upon Pela. She's like, he's way better than Pela. That's not what we're here to talk about, okay? Pela's underrated, that's all I'm here to say. Now, despite the fact that I mentioned it earlier, people just don't listen, so I'm gonna say it again. These characters are not the best characters in the game. These characters are characters that still hold up with the right investment, with the right combat awareness. They can still get the clear. It just takes a little bit more effort. Now, a quick honorable mention, Asta, right? There's just a better version of Asta out there now, right? What does Asta do? Team-wide attack buff. What does Asta do? 52 speed for every single character on your team when she uses her ult. What does Robin do? All of those things, but better. Rather than give out speed, she just action advances the entire team. Who needs speed when your characters just get to go next? You know what I mean? And the attack buff is better, right? It's more reliable, right? There's just everything about Robin's better. And in every other scenario, you could have used Asta. For example, in a DOT team, there's better options. Robin again. Oh, Ron May, right? There's just unfortunately too many people in front of Asta now to have given her a true spot on the list. but that's why I'm giving her the honorable mention. She can still hold up on DOT teams. The problem is that DOT has not been getting enough love in the game, and by the time DOT does get love, you're probably going to see some actual dedicated DOT supports, pushing Asta even further into irrelevancy. So, unfortunately, she doesn't make the list, but I just wanted to mention that. Now it's time to talk about Dan Heng in Bibeter Lune, right? This dude has received more indirect buffs through character introductions, etc., than somebody like Jingliu. Jingliu was better than him for a good long time, but her days were numbered, and I talked about this before her rerun ever even came out, that she has a very serious problem within her kit that cannot be fixed by characters or relics. This is an in-game problem, a Hoyoverse problem that they either have to fix or not. You know what I mean? When she's in her buff state, she deals a ton of damage. And when you finish off an enemy on your last stack that you have with her ult, if you defeat the enemy and get enough energy to ult next, you can ult quickly and keep her in her buff state. The problem is when you're in end game content and you're moving on to the next main wave, you are not allowed to activate your ultimate preemptively. You will fall out of her damage state, her damage completely goes away, and the character just suffers for it. Either Hoyoverse will fix this or not, but they probably aren't because that is how the game has been coded since day one, and I don't think they plan on fixing it just for one character, so we'll see if they one day change her kit. But as of right now, Dan Heng in Bibeter Lune deserves to be on a list like this more than someone like Jingliu. His day in the sun has come. He's finally well, it's been a while now, but he's surpassed Jingliu in terms of damage output. And it's just facts, right? He is better now, and that people just have to understand and accept that. All right, now this next one is not necessarily for a specific character. I guess it's kind of for an entire meta. DOT. DOT can still hold up with good investment, with good combat awareness, with good teams, with good relics, with a lot of work. You know what I'm saying? With more work than Hoyoverse seems to be giving them meta, right? We only have sub-DPS characters for DOT. We don't have a single actual dedicated DOT support. We don't technically have a main DPS. The closest thing we have is Kafka, so I guess you can make the argument there that it kind of fits, right? Maybe you don't ever even really need a main DPS for DOT, but the point is we're missing several roles for the meta. You don't have a single sustainability character for DOT either, okay? So this is a meta that hasn't received a lot of love, but if you have tried it yourself and you have a strong DOT team, they can actually still clear. Not as well as some of your other teams for sure, right? And DOT, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, will see its time in the sun eventually, and it won't be too far from now. Look out in the next few months or so. But anyways, the DOT meta can still get a decent clear on at least one of your teams, and as long as your other team is a strong team, you could still clear in like 10 cycles or whatever the heck it is. And it doesn't have to be Memory of Chaos that they perform well in. They can perform well in other environments like, let's say, Pure Fiction, depending on the buffs that are given to you in that Pure Fiction. So they still hold up given the right circumstances. They're not very strong compared to a lot of the other high-powered teams out right now. Hence, they're underrated, considering they can still clear. Anyways, that's a bit of a controversial one. Hope you guys enjoyed that. But yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of characters that you feel like I'm not including on this list that you may want to include in the comments. So put them down below who you feel like is an underrated character, or maybe just an underrated meta, etc., etc. That way we can further the discussion, and potentially it might end up in a future talking point of a video. If you like this kind of stuff, consider leaving a like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.